it is just, well, it's a lot of energy. It's a lot of children, but it's also a lot of joy. It is a really beautiful thing to see all of these kids show up, be excited to sing about God, be excited to learn a story about God and how he uses water all over the Bible, and then the after school stuff where they just run around and play and enjoy time. And I mean, it is, I don't think I've gotten home before 9:30 any Wednesday night this summer. And that's a really, really beautiful thing. So if you have somebody that you can invite to Power Hour, we've got adult classes. They're great, I'm sure. I'm not in them, but I'm sure they're great. We've also got this kids class. And one thing I have noticed about humans and parents my age, kids mean a lot more to them than the class for themselves. And if you can think of somebody who has some kids that would benefit from this, just simply invite them. Sometimes that's all it takes, and then they show up and realize how special of a place the church can be, and we have an opportunity to show them what Jesus is all about. So that is some stuff we've got going on this summer, some stuff that's been going on really well, and some ways that you can plug in. Today, it's morning time. It's been a long 2 weeks for me. This morning, we're going to talk about membership, church membership. I think this idea of church membership generally conjures up a certain idea. Some of you may immediately think of like church attendance. How many members do you have here today? Or church membership like, how many people are on your books, right? How many quote unquote identified members do you have at your church? Then I think for some of us who might feel that initially, we pull back the other way and we think, okay, well, church membership is anyone who's a Christian. And there's a sense, a very, very true sense in which that's absolutely right. I think all the leadership here would affirm that statement that church membership is what happens when someone is baptized into the body of Christ. There's this idea of the universal church. Anyone who is a believer, a baptized believer and faithful follower of Jesus is a member of the church. Yeah. Absolutely, because that's what the church is. The church is bigger than this place on this day. The church is also in about an hour. The people on Mountain Standard Time will start worshiping, and the church is over there too. And I don't know, 15 hours it seems like in California they'll also be worshiping. Right? Like the church is in different places. The church is different groups of people. The church is not just right here, right now. We are not the only church that is the church. The church and members of the church, man, that's a beautiful mosaic of what God's body is meant to look like. The only problem, because I think all of that is true and I think it's a beautiful thing. The only problem is sometimes, in an effort to emphasize the universality of the church, we sort of diminish what it means to be a member of a local church. Now, whether or not you feel as though membership is a biblical term, I want to separate our two questions for this morning. Am I a member of the one true church that Jesus died for? Absolutely. Sure, we're going to take that. That's a different question than what we're tackling this morning. What we're going to tackle this morning is the question of, am I a member, or what does membership look like in a local work, in a local church? The problem that sometimes arises when we talk about it only in the universal church sense is that sometimes if everywhere is your home, then nowhere is your home, right? Sometimes if everything is a yes, then really nothing is a yes, right? There's this problem of oversaturation. And sometimes when we talk about church membership in the universal sense, it allows for, well, I'm a member of any Church of Christ around, so I can go to any of them. And what that can lead to, an unintended consequence of that true teaching, is that people can bounce around without ever really finding a home and settling down with a church and getting involved in a local work. And what will end up happening, because everywhere is my home, is someone may end up having a problem with leadership. And so they go somewhere else. where the leadership is different. They may have a problem with other members. Conflict has arisen and they go somewhere else with other members. Or they may have a problem with certain programs, and so they go somewhere else that either has or doesn't have certain programs. The real problem, though, is, as you know, in families or groups of people, you have a tendency to find those problems everywhere you go. Maybe the problems follow you, it seems like. And what it leads to is people finding a problem, leaving, and then finding another problem, and then leaving. In Durant, there were a bunch of little county churches. There was like Durant, and then there were these little tiny 1 and 2 Oklahoma A school-sized towns. Like they were little itty-bitty towns. And people would do this. There was I can think of like 3 families that kind of made the rounds. Every 3 months, they'd show up somewhere else. And every 3 months, they'd get upset about something else. And they'd go here, problem, here, problem, here, problem. Then they'd come back. You'd be like, hey, you're back. And they'd say, yeah, we're back. For 3 months, and then there was another problem. It causes a problem because if you don't have a home family, you will find yourself sort of floating without a family. And I don't think that's how the Bible or how God wanted us to function in a church. The real problem, though, comes down to a problem of our mindset. I think the famous quote says, ask not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? This sums up the idea with church membership that I want to drive at today. Church membership is different than many other memberships that you have in your world. Some of us have gym memberships. Some of us have club memberships. Some of us have Costco memberships, which is exclusive and special, but not what we're talking about. See, these other contexts where we're members at places, they have this connotation of what am I getting out of that membership? What do I have to do to be a part of that group or club? And what can that club do for me? This is not in any way the design behind the church. So I want to give a definition, and it'll kind of serve as the outline for the lesson this morning. If we ask the question, what is membership? I would say that being a member of a local church is being an active part of the body, focused on giving and unifying for the sake of the mission of the church. So being a member of a local church is being an active part of the body, focused on giving and unifying for the sake of the mission of the church. So let's break down each one of these as we keep going. First, we have to be an active member of the body. We have to be, it's like one of those things that if you say it the opposite way, it doesn't make any sense. It's nearly incoherent. What is an inactive member of the body? Like, what even is that? If you have an inactive member of your body, what is it doing? I'll put it this way. An inactive member of your body would be like my dad's hair. It's non-existent. It's really not a member of the body. It's not there. There are a couple of examples I could have used this morning. Listen, an inactive part of the body is a part of the body that's not doing anything. It's not useful. It's not beneficial. It's interesting that when Paul talks about the church, he uses this metaphor of a human body. Look at the passage that we were at for our scripture reading in 1 Corinthians 12. 1 Corinthians 12, Paul is dealing with what I think is a sort of a misremembered part of the church in Corinth when he gets to this metaphor. But he's talking about the body requiring different parts to be functional. And if someone is not a part of the body, if someone is not functioning, then they're not really a part of the body. So look at verse 12. It says, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we are all made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? And if the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. And if all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. Listen, this metaphor is not of something stagnant. It's not of something that doesn't require some effort. If you are going to, this is a little bit silly, but let's run with this metaphor. If you are going to be a hand and you refuse to do the things a hand does, how are you helping the body? Well, you're not. Imagine for a second my hand, my left hand, which is nearly not useful at all, especially when, writing or anything like that. But imagine for a second if my left hand just decided, you know what? I'm not going to help you eat, but I still want to be fed. How would that help me? In fact, what would that do besides be a nice, solid paperweight for when the wind is blowing my Bible open? I mean, this just would become completely useless. And worse than useless, a detriment to the actual body. Because the body is made up of all these parts. It's a living organism. There are certain diseases that when they infect a part of your body, to keep the rest of your body healthy, you have to amputate certain parts of your body. Why is that? What a weird, just fix it there, and why is what happens in my foot going to affect my heart and lungs? Well, it's because our body is a living organism. It is in a symbiotic relationship with all of its parts all at once. And I think this metaphor that Paul uses here is telling because in the church, we're part of a body. What happens to part of us affects all of us. What happens to one of us can impact the rest of us. Has anybody, I've heard this used a number of different times, but it's such a visceral example. Has anybody ever stubbed a pinky toe? Has anybody ever watched somebody stub a pinky toe? I mean, listen, you will watch the strongest, most powerful, grown human being you've known stub a pinky toe and curl into a ball. All right? They just crumple to the floor and they hold it. It's like everything in their whole body. Only thing that matters is that toe. It's because it's our body. It's because our body is a living organism. And in the church, we've got to have active participation in the body. Inactive parts of the body don't make any sense. The body requires an active participation. I heard a guy refer to some Christians as CEO Christians. Have you heard that before? I had not heard it. I thought it was kind of clever. He said they're Christmas and Easter only Christians, CEO Christians, right? I thought that was kind of a funny acronym because CEO sounds like really invested and powerful, and yet he was using that acronym to describe someone who is remarkably inactive as it pertains to the life of the church. If we are an inactive part of the body, what happens when we get sick? I'll tell you this. My dad never worries about his hair getting messed up. He doesn't. Why? Well, because it's an inactive part of the body. There are some people whose bodies have been through some kind of trauma or hurt, and they're paralyzed, and there's a part of their body that's inactive. Well, what happens when they stub a toe? Not much. Here's the deal. If you're an inactive part of the body, you're not really a functioning part of the body. When you hurt, it's harder for people to know about it because they don't know you as part of the body. I don't mean this to be harsh, but I mean this to be sincere. If you are not active, you're not a part of the body in the same way. A part of the universal church? Absolutely. But a part of the local church, it becomes much harder to see the parallels and the connections to this metaphor that Paul uses. So, a member of a local church is an active part of the body that is focused on giving. Let's talk about giving for a minute. Paul says in Acts chapter 20, he actually quotes Jesus. He says that it is more blessed or blessed, Joshua, to give than to receive. And that's just something that we tell our kids all the time, right? At Christmas time. You just tell them, It's more blessed to give than to receive. By the way, here are your presents. And they don't ever get the message. Mine don't, at least. They're just very excited about opening presents, which I get. But there's this tendency when it comes to choosing a local church for people to say something along the lines of, well, I'm just not getting anything out of fill in the blank. I've heard people say it about worship. I'm just not getting anything out of the worship. I want to find a place where I get more out of the worship. I'm just not getting anything out of the Bible classes. They don't go deep enough, seems to always be the complaint. They don't go deep enough for me. I'm going to go find a place where I can get more out of the Bible. I'm just not getting anything out of the preaching, which, that's fair. I won't even argue with you that much on this one. But listen, when that's our approach to a local church, our mindset is very much the opposite of it's more blessed to give than to receive. In fact, what we're saying, out loud even, is I'm here to get something, not to give something. A local church is built in a way, like a body, that it requires activity and it requires the members to be invested in giving rather than receiving. Most clubs that we participate in, believe it or not, most memberships we have were not active. That's like actually the business model for most gyms. Did you know that? Most like weight rooms and gyms, they will sign people up knowing that only about 10% of people will actually use their membership, and therefore they are making money on the 90% of people who are not. That's their business model. Because a gym, you can be a member and be as inactive as you want. At a club, you can be a member just to get something out. I am a member at Costco because I really like their hot dogs, right? Like, I get something out of that membership, which actually you don't have to be a member to get the hot dogs, but we buy diapers there, and it's a big deal. Listen, you have memberships in our world to get something out of them. The church is very different. It's never been designed for something to give you something. Let me back up. The primary focus of the church is not to give you something, but for you to give something to it. There's an illustration that I've seen people do at marriage retreats. You may have seen this. I may have talked about this before. But it's a low ropes course, and the ropes will start in really close, and then they'll spread out further and further and further. And what they'll do is they'll have a couple get on these ropes, and they'll stand their feet on the rope, and they're just so high above the ground. And they'll hold their hands together. And as they're really close together, it's easy to stand. As they get further and further apart, they say, whatever you do, make sure you don't fall. Couples can't get halfway, and they lose their balance and fall. What they do the second time is they say, all right, now this time, focus on holding the other person up the whole way down the ropes course. And you can actually watch, people will go and go and go, and it's shocking how close they can get to the ground when they're focused on holding the other person up. This is a picture of what the church was meant to be like. Are you going to get something out of the church? Yeah, you're going to get held up. But that blessing, that benefit, really only is given when you show up ready to give. This is what the church is meant to look like. It is about giving and not receiving. Just like Jesus, when he was teaching his disciples, he said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus didn't ever think it was about receiving, but it was always about giving for him. Number 3, being a member at a local church is about being an active part of the body, focused on giving and unifying. I think this might be our biggest challenge, especially in our world today. It is so easy to want to distinguish or separate yourself from other people. But if we are going to be a member of a local church, we've got to be focused on unifying rather than dividing. When you look at other memberships, you notice how other memberships have different levels, different tiers. I'm a platinum member, right? At Costco, I just saw recently, they opened up the club. Last night we were there. They opened up the Costco club, the warehouse, 1 hour earlier on Saturdays for executive members. Courtney looked at me and goes, are we still executive members? I said, no, we're common members. And so we don't get to come an hour early on Saturdays. Now, this is interesting, right? Because even within something that is supposed to be giving you something, we're still separating ourselves based on, status or wealth. We have a tendency, even when we're a member of a club, to divide within that club. Unfortunately, I think the church has gotten a dose of that. over the years. And we have a tendency to want to divide ourselves over all kinds of things. I would give you examples, but then we'd start taking sides, and Sunday would turn into anarchy. What I mean is, we're not great at this as people right now. We have a really hard time overcoming differences and looking at problems and sticking to it anyway. This is a problem all through our culture, and certainly as part of the culture, we have a problem with it in the church as well. But this is not the way the church is meant to be. The church is actually meant to be a lighthouse in this regard. When Paul talks about the church, he talks about unity as like the second most important thing above all things. For Paul, it's not a surprise. Thing number one in his teaching is the gospel. You've got to know about Jesus. You've got to follow Jesus. You've got to trust in Jesus. But thing number two, and it comes through very clearly in Paul's teaching, is unity among believers. Not, as I've said before, uniformity, but unity. Not a monolith, but a mosaic that is unified even in spite of difficulty. Ephesians chapter 4 is one of the spots where Paul does this. He goes on to talk about the 7 different unified elements of the church, often called the 7 ones. But right before this, he says in verse 1, I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There's so many pieces of this. I feel like we could just spend the whole lesson talking about humility, gentleness, patience, love, all in an effort. Notice this. Humility, gentleness, patience, and love are all to serve what purpose? Unity. That these attitudes, these ways that we go about things are meant to inspire unity among believers. Not division, right? He doesn't even say that the aim is love here. But instead, the love and the patience and the gentleness and the humility are all meant to support the unity in the church. Paul talks more about this, and we don't have time this morning, but Paul talks more about this in Romans 14, going as far as to say he would be willing to give up his liberties as a Christian for the sake of unity. He also says that others should be willing to give up their, not convictions, but some of their beliefs, to relax on some of their beliefs for the sake of unity. He then goes in 1 Corinthians and he talks about meat sacrificed to idols, and he gives the same principle. If this causes my brother to stumble, I won't even touch meat again, because unity is more important than eating meat. Paul never had good steak, is what that means. I'm kidding, right? Paul obviously felt like unity in the church was so radically important that he would alter, think about this, Paul would go vegan for unity. Would you? I don't know. That's a really, really tough line to draw. That's my entire lifestyle, right? Like that is something that I would then have to think about 3 times a day, every single day, what I eat. Cereal and milk, gone. I don't know how I'd function, Hunter. Listen. Paul is actively telling the Christians in Corinth and the Christians in Rome, for the sake of unity, change your whole life, even if it's not sinful. He says meat sacrificed to idols isn't a sin. So even if it's not sinful, for the sake of unity, change your whole life. That's a really, really strong stance for Paul to take. But it makes sense when you remember what Jesus said in John chapter 13. Look at John 13 and verse 35. Let's start in verse 34. John 13 and verse 34, Jesus says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. And by this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. There is something about the way Christians interact that is supposed to reflect who Jesus is. What I mean is, when we say, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven, Our hyper individualist society makes us think, my light, Joseph's light, has to shine so people see God. What I think Jesus might have had in mind was y'all's light. Did you know y'all is in the Bible? Y'all's light. Let you all's, y'all's. It's a great word, all right? Let y'all's light so shine. This is not just about, hey, I do good things. Look at God, he's awesome. We love each other. That's not a normal way to be a part of a club. That's not what membership normally looks like. And so if we remember that unity is a hallmark characteristic of what a church member should look like, striving for unity, I think our church will be healthier. Being a member of a local church is being an active part of the body, focused on giving and unifying for the sake of the mission of the church. Well, this verse really ties us right into the mission of the church. How are people going to know who Jesus is? How are people going to know who God is if we, the people meant to represent him, don't look like him at all? They're not. We've talked a number of different times about the kingdom. And we talked about how the kingdom is the place where people are doing the will of God, and how the will of God is to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly. And we talked about what the kingdom looks like and how Christians can open up a space for the king. This is one of the missions of the church, is to go out and open up a space to bring the spiritual or the intangible parts of God to the place where people are hurting. All right, this is Christians. This is a mission of the church. So I want to tell you about a preacher. There was a preacher who had a day. Let's just call it a day. It was a Saturday, okay? Saturday morning, this preacher got up, and it was about 9 o'clock. He headed over to his office with nothing on the schedule, except for, of course, finishing his sermon, because that's what Saturdays are for, don't you guys know? And he sat down to study and work on his lesson, and he got a call. It was an emergency. One of the families at church, a family of 5, had been in a car accident, and 4 of them were fine, but the father of the family was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. And so immediately, he quit working on his lesson, and he takes off and he goes to the hospital. He sits with the family for 2-3 hours, and during the course of that time, they got news that the dad didn't make it. His critical condition turned terminal, and he passed away. And he sat with the family for another couple hours until he felt like they were okay to be alone, and there were some other members of the church there with him. Then he leaves, and he heads back to the office, only to get 2 more urgent calls on a Saturday. One of them was what he would describe one of the strong workers in the church telling him that his wife had been having an affair. They cried for a couple hours. The other was one of the song leaders of the church who was having a crisis of faith and was considering leaving the faith altogether, just walking away. And so they sat together for a couple of hours. Well, no more time to work on his lesson. He had to do the convocation at a local high school basketball game. He shows up, he says the prayer, and then he's visiting with the people there who wanted some of his time. He didn't get out of there until after 9 p.m. He finally gets home, and he sits down, lesson unfinished, family, no time, and he begins to weep because the man who passed away that morning was actually his very best friend. He didn't even have a moment to grieve that day. This is not every day in the life of a minister. It's not. But it's not uncommon to have a day like that. In fact, as that story was, as I was reading that story, I couldn't help but think back on days that I remember my dad having like that. One thing after the next. You go one place to open up a space for the kingdom and bring God's comfort. You go another place to be a voice in the community. You go another place to counsel someone who's hurting or someone who is scared. It's a lot. It's a lot. Now, the truth of the matter is, a lot of these examples are not everyone's job. It is not everyone's job to sit down and counsel people through infidelity in their marriage. It's not. If you find yourself in that position, then maybe it's your job. But it's not everyone's job. That takes some finesse. It takes some wisdom. It takes some skill and know-how. It's not everyone's job to talk someone off of the metaphorical spiritual ledge when they are questioning their faith. That's a high-stakes, scary situation, and not everyone has that expertise. That's part of the reason why Paul trains ministers like Timothy and Titus. That's part of the reason why, to this day, we pay ministers to do some of these things, because they do have an expertise. So then what is your job if you're not that guy or girl to do those things? I think we've got to pray for our leaders more. We've got to be people who are regularly praying for wisdom, that our leaders will have wisdom, that we're praying for rest for our leaders, that we are praying for ways that we can help lighten the load of our leaders, whether this is elders or preachers or ministry leaders, people who are leading a ministry. We've got to be people who are praying for our leaders, because any day could be that kind of day, and praying for the family of our leaders as well. There are many, many situations where the preacher has given everyone everything he has, and he gets home with nothing left. And I think that this can cause an unhealthy church, because if one person is focused on the mission and the others don't feel buy-in, the whole church will suffer. A church member is an active part of the body focused on giving and unifying for the sake of the mission of the church. Are you an active church member who is giving and unifying for the sake of the mission of the church? I don't know. I don't know where you're at. I don't know if you feel like you check all four of those boxes. To be honest with you, it's an arbitrary definition I made up this morning as I was working to frame the lesson appropriately. But I think it's a good benchmark. I think these are good questions to ask ourselves as followers of Jesus. Would Jesus be an active member who is giving and unifying for the mission of, you bet he would. So maybe another way to ask it, are you acting like Jesus as a member of this local work? Because the local church is a blessing and a gift if you are invested the way that God wants us to be. Ultimately, we are not a club. We are not a membership the way that we usually think about that. What we are is much more like a family. We're part of a family that's been born again, as the song says. And if you want to be a member of this family, it requires a lot of you, and it gives you more back than you could ever imagine. Like we said at the beginning, the idea of a member of the church is a very universal thing, and that's the invitation that we offer this morning. If you want to be a member of the church, meaning forgiven of your sins by the blood of Jesus, washed in the blood and cleansed through the waters of baptism, and we can show you all what the book says about that this morning. We'll take the Bible, put it in your hand, and let you read it. We don't want you to trust us. We want you to trust God. That's what this whole journey is all about. And if you need prayers of the church, man, this is why we have the church. This is why being a member of the church is such an enormous blessing, is because this is a place that at its best is full of people who are active, giving, unifying, and mission-focused. And if you need prayers from these people, let us know, and we'll pray with you as well. Whatever you need, we'll help you while we stand.